championship odds without feeling like the gap should be enormous between 1, 2, and 1 and everybody else. Like, how do you go into a playoff series thinking anybody can win 4 out of 7 from Golden State? I mean, I know they're not the same Warriors team this year. They're going through lulls. There's clearly kind of an atrophy going on with that team where it's just like, oh, God, here we are in January. We've gone to the finals so many times. We win at a level that we do. How do we get motivated for these games? But when they get to the playoffs, they're going to be the same Golden State Warriors team. They're going to be run by 2 guys that have won MVPs. I love what Houston's done. Look, I think the Rockets, the way they've changed the defensive culture there, not just with Chris Paul, but also the Mbah Moutes of the world. Also PJ Tucker. Yeah, yes. These guys are high-level defensive players who have changed the dynamic in Houston. Do I think the Rockets can win 4 out of 7? No. I love Oklahoma City. I think Paul George has figured things out. In fact, I think Paul George is there for the long term. Do I think they can win 4 out of 7? No. San Antonio, same thing. It's just hard to kind of realistically look at this. And your Cavaliers are not beating them in 4 out of 7. That's not happening under any circumstances.
Just like they weren't making the finals. I know, man.
Okay, that's
long-term proclamations about Cleveland.
Apples and oranges.
So the opposite of book your hotels for Cleveland. Okay, go ahead, CC. I'm sorry.
I mean, I think that it's a bigger obstacle in saying they can beat Golden State comparing to saying they could beat the 2 teams in the East, being Toronto or Boston.
Of course it's a bigger obstacle. They'll be underdogs. If the Cavs make the finals, they'll be underdogs. But we saw the Cavs beat what was up to that point in time the greatest team in NBA history 4 out of 7. So the idea that they can't do it is absurd. But is it a 3-team race? Basically, since the 3rd week of the season, I thought it was a 3-team race because I thought Houston was in it. I still feel that way. Now, San Antonio is a bit of an X factor because we haven't seen them fully healthy this year. And like we might not ever see them fully healthy this year, but we also haven't seen San Antonio against the Durant version of the Warriors really in a high-leverage game, except for, because if you remember last year, Pop rested his guys in one of those matchups. We saw him for 2.5 quarters in the Western Conference Finals last year, and then Kawhi got hurt, and we don't know. But I do believe it's a 3-team race, and I do believe Houston absolutely can win the title this year. I know they're going to be underdogs against the Warriors. They would be favorites against the Cavs, but they could lose to either of those teams. But I think Houston... Chris, we saw him up close and personal. I know you've seen him up close and personal a number of times. I don't see a hole. Like, I don't see going into the trade deadline, I wasn't like, man, you know what Houston needs to add is this. Like, I felt that way about the Thunder once Roberson went down, that they needed to add a defensive wing. Right. I don't feel that way about Houston.
What I worried about Houston was their ability to play defense for 48 minutes, but also how they were going to close out games. And what I've seen between Chris Paul and Harden and what they do to close out games, they don't go isolation anymore. One reason why Toronto is better this year, and I think that we should include them in the conversation. They got the best home record in the NBA. They're better on offense. So with me, the question with Houston was, how are they going to be able to close out Golden State? Harden going one-on-one, trying to get to the free throw line, that's not good enough. You know, so the way they play basketball and seeing how him and Chris Paul alternate, how they run more pick and roll to close out games compared to what they've done in isolation basketball, I believe Houston is a threat. But Golden State, to me, is the team that everyone's gunning for. So you guys can say a 3-team race, 4-team race. Golden State is head and shoulders better than the other teams.
I will say this, from when I talk to people in Houston over the course of the year, the one thing that they've told me is that this is the hungriest version of the Rockets team that's been around. And Chris Paul's a big part of that. I mean, Chris Paul, we know his record of playoff futility in New Orleans and Clippers, no conference finals. I mean, he wants this. And I think Chris Paul can taste it. Similarly, James Harden, after all the frustration, you know, individually.
Last year ended in an embarrassment for the Rockets. People like, oh, they lost to the Spurs.
Yes.
They
lost to Becky Hammond's D-League or Summer League team.
Exactly right.
Out there. Like, I mean, that's who literally who they lost.
They had the critical Game 5 when the series is tied 2 games apiece. No Kawhi, no Tony Parker in Houston.
Yeah.
And they lost the game.
It was the Summer League team. You look at the roster side by side. It was LaMarcus Aldridge and the Summer League team.
And so Houston has a reason to have a chip on their shoulder. You referenced a team that we almost have a prohibition about talking about on the show, and I want to talk about them for a moment. Toronto. So it's not just that Toronto's got the 3rd best record in the league. There is something to me that's sometimes more indicative than actual win-loss record, and that's point differential.
Yeah.
Toronto's point differential this year is better than Golden State's. Toronto's point differential is second best in basketball behind only Houston. Why do you think, Mannix, no one, maybe this stage included, actually takes the Raptors seriously as a team, as a championship contender?
Two reasons. One is history. And you talked about the offense, and it's a different offense they're playing this time around, more free-flowing, less isolation heavy. The question is, with the playoffs, is will they just automatically revert to DeRozan, Lowry, back and forth? Because sometimes in the playoffs, teams that play up tempo, it's not that easy. Possessions become become at a premium. They don't do it that much. The second part of it is their second unit. They changed the second unit in the offseason.
Yep.
They have been great. But you're asking people like us to count on a Delon Wright, to count on a Fred VanVleet, to count on guys that are having great regular seasons but have no history in the postseason. Look, as a starting five, that Raptors team is as tough as they come. Serge Ibaka has given them a defensive presence at the 4 spot that they haven't had in years past. But that second unit still has to prove that they can succeed against the Clevelands, the Bostons, the Washingtons when they get to the second round and beyond.
Mannix, let me ask you this. Earlier, I'm going to have my boy Nick's back for a second. You kind of just very quickly dismissed the notion of Cleveland being able to get with Golden State come these finals. I want to say I looked at the new look Cavs, as we're calling them. And, yeah, you're right. The odds of them, winning 4 out of 7 are high. But it looked possible to me. I think it even looked more possible than I would have imagined it to be, even be having this conversation.
Well, look, I can give you two things on that, too. One is it's the same with Toronto in some ways, in that you're going to be asking guys that are untested to play huge roles in a finals matchup. You're asking some of the guys they brought over to play huge roles in the type of situations that they've never had to do before.
But aren't they incentivized around that?
They're incentivized, but it's the lights go on. It's tough. I mean, you play.
You got to put it out there. Golden State has a couple of players, too, on their second rotation who aren't proven. Yeah,
they do, but, like, they're the Jordan Bells and the McCaws and those guys, they're not going to play as big a role as a Hood and other guys with this group. The other part of it is, the Cavs last year, the last three games of that series, those are the best 3 games I think I've ever seen Cleveland play, and they won one of them.
Okay,
one of them.
Sure,
that was a phenomenal 3 games they played.
Okay, I'm glad.
I don't think they can play at that level anymore.
Okay,
without Kyrie Irving, without Kyrie, I don't think they can play at that same level.
All right, but you're right. They only won one of them, and they were a Kyle Korver corner 3 away from winning 2 of them, and that series being totally different. Now they missed.
And hand grenades.
Of course, they missed. But if we're going to use that 3-game sample to project forward, we do essentially what that 3-game sample was: a Cavs win, a Warriors win, and a tie. Now, there's no ties in the NBA. The Warriors ended up winning it. That's why they won in 5. But if we're going to use it to project forward, that would say the Cavs absolutely can hang with this team. And the one thing with Golden State, it's why Steve Kerr yesterday decided to have Draymond and Iggy coach the team. Man, that 4 straight finals thing is real. The atrophy of the seasons, the 100-game seasons is real. And Cleveland, for good or for bad, they're not going to have to deal with that because they only got 4 guys that were even on last year's finals team anymore. Like, forget guys that have been for all 4 of them. They have essentially new legs and new rosters. So.
And back to incentive, they know if they don't bring home that jewelry, LeBron is essentially gone.
Right.
For sure.
Right, but you can make the argument, a reasonable argument, despite the regular season record, that Golden State's a better team than they were last year. Kevin Durant in his second year with that team, they've fleshed out the bench with some young guys. You can make the argument. I don't care if they win 65 games, whatever it is. That's a better team. You can't make that argument that the Cavs, without Kyrie Irving, are a better team than they were last year.
We'll see how they look after 25 games.
We'll see.
We'll see if they look like a better team in a better position.
This is good. Now that I've had to give up Boston, we can do this.
Yeah,
this is like.
By the way, Boston wasn't mentioned. They're 30-1. Boston got any shot to be in this? Okay.
See how
that looks pretty weak there. All right,
Chris. Sign one more guy.
Mannix, thanks so much for staying with us here. Next up.